I'm Mike Quackenbush. This is Till We Make It, and today on the program, I want to walk you through the process of booking a venue for your pro wrestling event or somebody else's pro wrestling event if it happens to be you who is shouldering that responsibility. So in the event that this is a venue that you or your team has never worked with before, visit their website first. Look for booking inquiries, contact information. It might be a phone number or it might be an email address. But in my long experience of booking venues, sending an email to the booking inquiries email address guarantees you a longer wait than if you're willing to pick up the phone and just call them directly. Whenever I make contact with a venue, I use this as my opening. Of course, I tell them what my name is, and I say up front, I am interested in booking your venue. Can you help me with that? Because you want to make sure you are actually speaking to someone that can book out the venue. There might be lots of people that work within the infrastructure of the building, but you don't need to talk to just anybody. You've got to get to one of the decision makers. And the bigger the venue, the more infrastructure around it, and the more people they have to answer emails and phone calls. So by saying, "Can you help me with that?" I am offering them the chance to redirect me to someone who can in fact help me book the venue. And you may have noticed something I didn't say in my opening. I did not tell them why. I did not tell them why I want to book the venue, which is for a pro wrestling event. I've just said I'm interested in booking your venue, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Eventually, you will get to the decision maker, the person that controls the book for the venue. At that point, you want to have a slightly more robust conversation. And I'm going to talk about the details of that conversation so that you leave after just one point of contact knowing what the lay of the land is. But prior to reaching the decision maker, withhold certain amounts of information. You don't want to tell them the date that you're looking at, you don't want to tell them what your price range is, and you don't want to tell them you're running a pro wrestling event until you get to the decision maker. So you might be thinking, Mike, why am I withholding that crucial bit of information? The reason why I am calling the venue in the first place. And here is why, based on my long experience of booking venues over the course of several decades. There are so many people inside the infrastructure of any given venue, and chances are the really important one, the decision maker, is the only one that needs to know all the details. Revealing those details before you get to the decision maker can only put a hurdle in front of you. What if the person who is tasked with answering the phone calls hates professional wrestling? Now you've got a hurdle you've got to overcome in conversation before you even get to the decision maker. And this person, they're not a decision maker. They can't say whether or not you get to book the venue. You've got to get to that person first. So don't put hurdles in front of yourself until you get to somebody who can actually make a real decision. But once you do get to that decision maker, then it's time for you to put all your cards on the table. And in my experience, this is when a conversation about past professional wrestling events hosted in this venue is most likely to come up. They're going to say something to you like, "Oh, we've had wrestling before and we didn't like it. We had wrestling come in before and they broke the rules of the guidelines. We've had wrestling come in before and they destroyed part of our venue. They came in before and did this to the locker room. Their talent behaved like this. This was the result of that show. The fans behaved this way, blah, blah, blah." And there's going to be potentially a mountain of objections you may hear when you're speaking to the decision maker. And I want you to know this is par for the course. But I'm not going to hang you out to dry. I want to give you my tried and true method of getting past all of those obstacles and getting to the booking. And whenever I've had to deploy this on a phone call, it's managed to turn the whole conversation around. So the very first thing I'm going to do is roughly assess the age of the person I'm on the phone call with. If I think they've got to be older than me, I'm going to mention the Beatles. If I think they're roughly the same age as I am, I'm going to mention U2. And if I happen to think the person is younger than me, then I'm going to choose a more recent pop star like Taylor Swift. And once I know exactly what age group I'm aiming at, I'm going to use this as my argument. When I hear a decision maker at a venue say to me, "Oh, we've had pro wrestling before and we're not going to try that again," I say something like this. "Well, I can appreciate that you've worked with another professional wrestling company in the past and they may not have been up to your standards. But you can't judge all professional wrestling organizations by that one experience. That would be like turning on the radio, hearing 30 seconds of a U2 song, and then deciding that music isn't for you. U2 is just one band in a universe of bands, and their music may or may not be for you, but that doesn't mean there isn't another band out there that is a perfect fit for you. Whenever I have roughly used that, or I mention the Beatles, or I mention Taylor Swift, depending on the age of the person that I'm speaking to, I've always been able to turn the conversation around. Unless you've got somebody who is just so close-minded on the phone that they cannot be reasoned with, that argument often turns things in my favor. And I think you will see similar success if you can artfully deploy it when it's needed most. So you're speaking to the decision maker, you've dealt with their objections, and you've agreed on a date. Well, now what? A few things may happen. Before you get off this call, here are 3 things you're going to want to ask about. Number 1, is there a deposit you need to pay to secure the date? And in the case of high demand venues, and even some intermediate demand venues, the answer will always be yes. Expect to pay a deposit anywhere between 20 and 50% based on the venue. Anything higher than 50%, I think, is a major red flag. I do not do business personally with any venue that asks for a deposit above 50%. So you want to know about the deposit, and you're going to ask about a contract. Can we put all of this in writing and lock in the rate? And chances are the contract's verbiage will include something about that deposit amount. But you want it all outlined in black and white, and you're signing it, or someone else that represents your organization will, and they will sign the contract as well, so the date is firm. So you talked about the deposit, and you've talked about the contract, and you've got to talk about insurance. Do they want your company to carry some type of liability or other event insurance to put on a pro wrestling card inside their venue? And I know there are some people out there that feel like even bringing up insurance at this stage could be like opening a can of worms. But calling on my own experience, I can tell you firsthand, you want to get the insurance thing sorted as fast as possible. You do not want to be out there seeking single-day event insurance close to your event date, or you run the risk of being upcharged by that insurance carrier. If dealing with the insurance aspect of wrestling is brand new to you today, I've got 2 things you need to know about. One is this. Some organizations can obtain an annual liability policy that covers all the pro wrestling events they put on throughout the course of a calendar year. But before that policy goes into effect, you will have to tell the insurance carrier how many events you're having. Your whole year will need to be plotted out. You'll need to know we are putting on exactly 32 events. They will all be roughly attended by crowds of this size, and then you pay one set fee for that liability policy. An annual policy like that is fairly uncommon in the world of professional wrestling. What is more common than that, though, is single-day event insurance. And this can be obtained at a variety of coverage levels, some covering as little as $50,000, and some I have seen covering up to $5 million. When it comes to single-day event insurance, generally speaking, venues do not ask for more than $2 million in coverage. And I can't think of a single example in decades of doing it where someone has asked me to offer more coverage to their venue than that. I know hearing that figure might sound insane up front, but know that these policies are reasonably priced. I've never paid more than $550 for single-day event insurance with coverage as high as $2 million. An important note for you about single-day event insurance. Those rates can vary greatly based on where you are. I'm certain single-day event liability policies in New York and California cost more than they do in South Dakota and Iowa. So bear in mind, it may change based on where you are putting your event on. And as I mentioned too, I've never come across one of those policies priced out at above $550. That might represent the maximum range you want to allow as you're working on your show budget. If calling a venue today is something you've got to get done for your company or the organization you represent, and this is the first that you're hearing about any of these insurance options, you might be asking yourself, who do I call to get that insurance? Do I call the same person that offers me auto insurance? Or home and real estate insurance? Well, yes, possibly. But chances are any insurance professional, if they can't hook you up with single-day liability event insurance, we'll know someone that can. And if it proves that they cannot, no, it is easily found through a basic Google search. There are even websites out there that will recommend an insurance person near you so that you don't have to deal with somebody on the other side of the country. So before you hang up your phone with the decision maker at that venue, make sure you've talked about the deposit, the contract, and the insurance. And if things are going swimmingly, it's never too soon to also talk about ancillary sales. Although, in my preference, I like to do that on a follow-up call, or I'll do it a little bit closer to the actual event date, especially if I'm working a full year in advance. And what do I mean by the ancillary sales? I mean specifically concessions and merchandise. In years past, I've been out on tour with the Chikara brand at least a handful of times when we walked into a venue and discovered only then that the venue was going to take a cut of our merchandise sales. They expected to be compensated for allowing us to sell our merchandise. They wanted a cut of those ancillary sales. And we've had venues ask for outrageous cuts. 15, 20, 25% of the merchandise figures sold on their premises, they expected to be paid to them. Similarly, if we were going to handle the concessions, you'd want to know, does the venue expect a cut of these sales? And all of that is the sort of thing you should try to suss out with the decision maker before the actual day of the event arrives. One last note about ancillary sales and your live pro wrestling event. Bigger venues may have an entire division that deals with food and beverage. You might have to have a meeting with their F&B person. And that conversation could include talking points like, are we going to offer our full menu? Or are we going to offer just our late night reduced menu? Do we customize the menu in some way to reflect the event? And what about alcohol sales? But if there is an F&B person, you also need to be prepared for this discussion. They may set a minimum for the venue during your event. This often happens in major metropolises. Metropoli? Many metropoli. So to give you a very practical example, there was a venue Chikara used to visit up in Brooklyn, New York, and they set a minimum for their F&B department of $2,500 per event. And here's what that meant. If they sold $2,500 or more during the course of our live event, well, Chikara wasn't on the hook for anything. But if they sold anything underneath that, we were expected to pay the difference. So if the venue only brought in $2,100 in sales, that $400 difference to reach the $2,500 minimum was coming out of our pocket. And that was a discussion that I did not have with the decision maker, but their F&B department. I needed to speak to someone who worked in food and beverage to understand that piece of the overall puzzle. One last tip for you before you jump on the phone. Remember this. About 30 days before your event, you're going to want to reach back out to the venue, even though you've already signed the contract, paid your deposit, etc., for this reason. In the period of time since you booked the venue, it's possible that someone in their infrastructure has left or been fired. The person you were dealing with might not be there anymore, or the food and beverage representative might have changed. But this way, you'll know exactly who to expect on the day of the event itself, and who you're going to be accountable to. If you're expected to show up and pay the balance due on the venue's rental, you're going to want to know which person to hand that envelope to. If there's someone you're going to have to settle up with on a food and beverage minimum that's set by that department, you're going to need to know who's in charge of that department at the end of the night so you can settle up with them. 30 days out is when I like to call once again just to confirm everything and make sure I'm going to be dealing with the right people. I don't doubt, as you demonstrate your trustworthiness across years of loyal service to a wrestling organization, you are likely to have more responsibility put on your plate. And dealing with the venue is a mission-critical job within a wrestling organization, one that you might be entrusted with. And if so, you'll be glad that this video exists. And if hearing this for the very first time you think to yourself, that's a job I might be really good at, this could prove to be an apt time for you to volunteer and demonstrate once again what makes you so valuable.